Picture this. You're standing on stage in front of 300 medical professionals while your own father calls you just a babysitter and jokes that you chose preschoolers because they can't talk back yet. The entire room erupts in laughter at your expense. Now imagine having the power to completely flip that moment and watch that same man beg for your professional approval just minutes later. That's exactly what happened to Amelia Carter, and trust me, this revenge story will leave you absolutely speechless. If you've ever been dismissed by your own family, if you've ever had your career choices mocked or minimized, then you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now, subscribe with notifications on, and buckle up for one of the most satisfying professional revenge stories I've ever covered. This is about a daughter who turned the tables so brilliantly that her surgeon father went from laughing at her little teaching job to desperately needing her approval for his life's work. My name is Amelia Carter, and I want you to understand something about family hierarchy. For 34 years, I lived at the bottom of it. Not because I wasn't accomplished, not because I didn't work hard, but because my father, Dr. Robert Brooks, renowned cardiac surgeon with 40 years of saving lives, measured worth in dollars and medical degrees. Let me paint you a picture of what family dinner looked like in the Brooks household. Picture a colonial mansion in Westchester, mahogany dining room, crystal glasses catching the light from an expensive chandelier. My father would sit at the head of the table like a king holding court, carving the roast with the same surgical precision he used to repair hearts. 812, he'd announce, not looking up from the meat. That's how many triple bypass surgeries I've performed. His voice would swell with unmistakable pride, the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you're the best at what you do. My older brother Michael would raise his wine glass like he was toasting royalty. You deserve recognition, Dad. How many lives is that now? More than I can count, Dad would respond, finally looking up to meet Michael's eyes. The connection between them was electric. Two doctors, two men who understood the weight of holding someone's beating heart in their hands. Then his gaze would land on me, and I'd feel myself shrinking in my chair. You'll come to the gala, won't you, Bethany? I know your schedule is flexible. Flexible. That single word contained decades of dismissal. That's what he called managing 32 preschoolers, developing innovative curriculum that parents drove across district lines to access, completing state assessments, and staying late every night to prepare materials that would give these children the best possible start in life. Of course I'll be there, Dad. Good. He'd turn back to Michael. Your brother will present my Lifetime Achievement Award. You just need to show up and smile. Show up and smile. Like I was decoration. Like my only purpose was to fill a chair and look appropriately proud while the real achievers in the family took center stage. But here's what my father didn't know as he sat there dismissing my little teaching job. I had just received an email that would change everything. An email from the Harper Foundation, the largest charitable organization in the state, managing over $200 million in assets. They wanted to interview me for Director of Education, a position that would put me in charge of $50 million in educational initiatives. More importantly, and this is where the universe's sense of poetic justice really shines, this position would give me oversight of healthcare grant proposals, including the $5 million application that Brooks Medical Center had submitted for Dad's pet project, expanding their cardiac unit. You need to understand the depth of this dismissal to truly appreciate what's coming. This wasn't just casual family teasing, this was systematic erasure of my accomplishments, my intelligence, my worth as a human being. Let me take you back to my college graduation 12 years earlier. Columbia University, Teachers College, master's degree in early childhood education. I had graduated with a 4.0 GPA, written a thesis on neuroplasticity in early childhood development that would later be published in 3 academic journals and cited by 15 other researchers nationwide. Columbia had offered me a research position, but I turned it down because I wanted to work directly with children. My father invited half his surgical department to watch his children graduate. Michael had finished pre-med the year before and was already accepted to Johns Hopkins. Me? I was the afterthought. "This is Bethany," he told Dr. Reeves, his colleague, as we stood in our caps and gowns. "She's going into teaching. Elementary level." He paused, like he was trying to soften a blow. "Well, actually younger. Preschool." Dr. Reeves gave me that polite smile people reserve for when they don't know what else to say. "How nice. That's not much schooling required for that, is it? Not like medical school." My father actually laughed. While I stood there holding my master's degree, he reduced 4 years of intensive study to babysitting. He never mentioned my thesis. Never mentioned my perfect grades. Never mentioned that I had turned down a prestigious research position to follow my passion for direct child development. Instead, he introduced my brother with a 15-minute biography of his achievements while I got "She works with small children." "Bethy's always been good with kids," he continued to Dr. Reeves. "Patient. Not everyone's cut out for the hard sciences." The hard sciences. As if understanding child psychology, neurological development, learning disabilities, curriculum design, and educational assessment weren't sciences. As if the research I was conducting on critical windows in brain development wasn't contributing to the same medical knowledge he claimed to respect. That pattern never changed. Every family gathering, every introduction, every proud parent moment went to Michael. I was the also child, the one who existed in the footnotes of family accomplishments. Fast forward to 3 months ago. Same colonial dining room, same crystal glasses, same hierarchy firmly in place. Dad was announcing his upcoming gala, 40 years of surgical excellence, black tie affair, the works. "I want you to present my Lifetime Achievement Award, Michael," he said, not asking, simply assigning roles like a director casting a play. "I'd be honored, Dad." Then came my assignment. "You'll come, won't you, Bethany? I know your schedule is flexible." There was that word again. Flexible. Like teaching was a hobby I could drop whenever real life, meaning his life, required attention. But this time, something was different. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Harper Foundation. Final interview invitation. Director of Education position. "No phones at dinner," Dad said automatically, the same rule from when we were teenagers. "Sorry." I slipped it back into my pocket, but not before seeing those life-changing words, "Final interview invitation." The Harper Foundation position wasn't just any job. This was the chance to revolutionize early childhood education across New York State. $50 million in funding. Partnerships with hospitals, schools, research institutions. The power to create comprehensive programs that bridged the gap between education and healthcare. As Michael launched into another story about his latest cardiac diagnosis, I sat there pushing peas around my plate, thinking about that email. This was my shot. My moment to prove that just a teacher could command respect in rooms where real decisions were made. But then my father dropped the bomb that would make his eventual humiliation even more satisfying. "Dr. Patterson will be at the gala," he said, mentioning my mentor from Columbia. "I already told her you'd love to see her again. She's flying in specially." My stomach clenched. Dr. Patterson wasn't just my former professor, she was on the Harper Foundation board. She was the one who had recommended me for this position. "She mentioned wanting to discuss some opportunity with you Thursday afternoon," Dad continued. "Actually at the hotel while we're setting up. I told her you'd be there all day helping with decorations." The manipulation was breathtaking. He was using my own mentor against me, assuming she'd guilt me into playing the dutiful daughter role while he basked in glory. He had no idea that Dr. Patterson's opportunity discussion was actually my interview for a position that would give me power over his hospital's biggest funding request. Thursday afternoon arrived like destiny calling. While my father arranged centerpieces and tested microphones, assuming I was skipping some meaningless teaching workshop, I was sitting in a Manhattan high-rise facing Margaret Harper herself. The Harper Foundation occupied the top 4 floors of the building, all glass and steel and power. Margaret Harper, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who controlled millions with a signature, led my interview panel. "Ms. Brooks," she began, "your resume is impressive, but what intrigues me most is your practical experience. Tell me about your integrated learning program." For the next hour, I did something I'd never been able to do at family dinner. I spoke about my work to people who actually listened. I explained how I'd partnered with pediatric therapists to identify developmental delays early. How I'd created assessment tools that helped parents understand their children's progress in medical terms. How early intervention in my classroom had helped 12 children avoid special education placements later. "Fascinating," Margaret said, exchanging glances with her board members. "We're launching a $50 million initiative bridging education and healthcare. We need someone who speaks both languages." Dr. Patterson, my mentor, leaned forward. "Most educators don't understand medical terminology, and most medical professionals undervalue early childhood development. It's a critical gap." "Exactly," I agreed. "When a 4-year-old can't grip a pencil properly, educators see fine motor delay. Doctors might see potential neurological issues. Both are right, but they rarely communicate effectively." Margaret pushed a stack of folders across the conference table. "Let me be frank. This position involves evaluating grant proposals from major medical institutions. You'd need to assess whether their programs genuinely serve educational needs or just pay lip service to get funding." I glimpsed the folder tabs as she spread them out. My blood ran cold. Brooks Medical Center. My father's hospital. "We need someone who understands both systems," Margaret continued, not noticing my reaction. "Someone who won't be intimidated by doctors claiming their work is too complex for educators to understand." Dr. Patterson spoke up. "Bethany has unique experience there. Her father is a surgeon." Margaret's eyes lit up like she'd struck gold. "Really? That must give you interesting perspectives on medical culture." Here was my moment. I could have played it safe, given diplomatic answers, maintained family peace. Instead, I chose truth. "It's taught me that doctors often dismiss other professions as lesser," I said. "They assume medical training makes them experts in everything, including education. They think because they went to school for years, they understand how learning works." Margaret actually laughed a delighted sound. "Oh, I like you. Tell me, how would you evaluate a proposal from a prestigious hospital requesting millions for expansion, but offering vague promises about community education?" I looked directly at her. "I'd require specific metrics. Not just we'll provide health education, but detailed curricula, qualified instructors, measurable outcomes. I'd want to see budget allocations proving they're not just checking boxes to get funding. Even if the hospital had an excellent medical reputation? Especially then. Prestige in one area doesn't guarantee competence in another." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Margaret closed the Brooks Medical Center folder with a decisive snap. "The position is yours if you want it." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I accept." "Wonderful. We'll announce it Monday, but I wanted to extend the offer personally." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. You know, that Brooks Medical Center proposal you just described? It's one of our top candidates, but their education component is weak. You'll need to evaluate it objectively. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted by the universe itself. Of course. That evening, I arrived at the Marriott Grand Ballroom 40 minutes late, my interview having run longer than expected. The space glittered with medical elite, 300 doctors, administrators, and donors celebrating my father's 4 decades of surgical excellence. The moment I walked in, I heard his voice booming from the stage, microphone in hand, mid-speech. Even my daughter could make it between nap time schedules. The laughter that rippled through the crowd felt like a physical slap. Some people chuckled genuinely, others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the cruelty in the joke. I found a seat at our family table as Dad continued his rehearsed humiliation routine. For those who don't know, Bethany works with children. Very small children, the ones who haven't learned to talk back yet. More laughter. Probably why she chose that age group. Michael caught my eye across the table and mouthed sorry, but the damage was rolling like an avalanche. Dad was in his element now, the spotlight feeding his ego. At least one of my children followed in my footsteps, he continued, gesturing toward Michael. My son, the doctor. My legacy in medicine. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from Harper Foundation. There it was, official and beautiful. Congratulations. Your appointment as Director of Education is confirmed. Starting salary, $120,000. As Michael took the stage to present Dad's Lifetime Achievement Award, his speech polished and heartfelt, I noticed movement at the ballroom entrance. Margaret Harper walked in, elegant in navy blue, commanding attention without saying a word. She caught Dr. Patterson's eye, then mine, and gave the slightest nod. A nod that said, "Are you ready?" Dad was back at the microphone, riding high on applause and adoration. I want to thank my family for their support. My wife, Susan, who sacrificed her own nursing career for mine. My son Michael, who makes me proud every day. Then came the pause that would haunt him forever. And Bethany, who is also here. The silence stretched like a held breath. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A few wives shot me sympathetic looks. Dad had literally run out of words for me. In a room full of accomplished professionals, he couldn't find a single achievement to mention about his own daughter. My son saves lives, he continued, finding his rhythm again. My daughter, she's also here. That's when Margaret Harper made her move. Margaret whispered something to the event coordinator, who looked surprised but immediately nodded. The woman took the microphone with authority. Before we move to dinner, we have a special guest who'd like to say a few words. Dad looked confused but pleased. Unexpected praise was still praise, and Margaret Harper was hospital royalty. Her foundation donated millions to medical institutions across the state. Let's bring the whole Brooks family up here, Dad announced, riding high on the evening's momentum. He had no idea he was orchestrating his own downfall. Come on up, all of you. We walked to the stage like actors in a play where only one of us knew the script. Mom in her elegant black dress. Michael confident in his tux. Me in my interview suit. I hadn't had time to change, and somehow that detail would make what happened next even more perfect. The lights were bright, 300 faces watching, expecting more of the same family hierarchy they'd witnessed all evening. This is my legacy, Dad announced, arm around Michael. My son, Dr. Michael Brooks, continuing our tradition of medical excellence. Applause filled the room. Michael smiled, comfortable in the spotlight he'd been groomed for since childhood. My wife, Susan, who gave up her nursing career to raise our children. More applause, though I noticed some of the younger women in the audience exchanging pointed glances at the casual dismissal of Mom's sacrificed ambitions. And Bethany. The pause stretched again. Someone coughed. Dad scrambled to fill the silence. She's always been the creative one. More interested in finger painting than anatomy diagrams. Nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. I stood there, spine straight, watching Margaret Harper position herself at the coordinator's microphone. Michael here just published his third paper on cardiac arrhythmias, Dad continued, desperate to return to comfortable territory. Bethany makes construction paper turkeys. That's when I spoke into the sudden quiet, my voice carrying without amplification, their developmental motor skill exercises. Of course they are, sweetheart, Dad said, condescension dripping from every word. Very important work, I'm sure. Margaret Harper's voice cut through the awkwardness like a surgeon's scalpel. Dr. Brooks, may I? Dad looked confused but delighted. Margaret Harper wanted to speak at his celebration? This was even better than he'd planned. Of course, Margaret. Everyone, Margaret Harper chairs the Harper Foundation, one of our most generous supporters. Margaret climbed the stage with grace, taking the microphone with the confidence of someone who controlled hundreds of millions in funding. The room fell silent, sensing something significant was about to happen. I apologize for interrupting, she began, but I simply couldn't wait until Monday to share some exciting news. She turned to address the audience, and I felt my heart hammering so hard I was sure the microphone would pick it up. The Harper Foundation is launching a revolutionary $50 million initiative bridging healthcare and education. We've spent months searching for the right director, someone who understands both worlds, who won't be intimidated by medical complexity or educational theory. Dad nodded along, probably thinking she was building up to announce funding for his cardiac unit expansion. We needed someone extraordinary. Someone with practical experience, academic credentials, and most importantly, the vision to transform how we think about health and education. Margaret turned to our family group on stage, and Dad preened, assuming she was about to shower him with praise for raising such an accomplished family. Today, we found that person. She looked directly at me. Amelia Carter will be our new Director of Education, overseeing all educational initiatives and evaluating our healthcare grant proposals. The ballroom went silent. Not polite, quiet, dead silent. 300 medical professionals processing what they'd just heard. The daughter who'd been mocked as a babysitter was now controlling millions in funding. Dad's smile froze on his face like a computer that had just crashed. Michael's mouth fell open. Mom gripped her clutch so tight her knuckles went white. But Margaret wasn't finished delivering this exquisite justice. Including, she continued, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, the $5 million grant proposal from Brooks Medical Center. The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible. Everyone understood the implications immediately. The disappointment daughter would now evaluate the father's funding request. The woman he'd called a babysitter held his legacy project in her hands. Dad's face cycled through emotions like a slideshow, confusion, disbelief, dawning horror as he realized what this meant for his carefully constructed hierarchy. This appointment was unanimous, Margaret continued, holding up an official document with the Harper Foundation seal visible even from the back of the room. Bethany's innovative work in early childhood development, her published research on neuroplasticity, and her practical experience bridging educational and medical interventions made her the clear choice. Published research. The thesis Dad had never asked to read was now being praised in front of his entire professional community. Dr. Patterson joined Margaret on stage, adding her voice to my vindication. I've had the privilege of mentoring Bethany since her Columbia days. Her thesis on critical windows in childhood development has been cited by 15 researchers nationwide. Dad found his voice, though it came out strangled. Her thesis, published? Published in 3 journals, Dr. Patterson confirmed with subtle satisfaction. You must be so proud, Robert. The irony in her tone was delicate but unmistakable. Around the room, people were recalculating everything they thought they knew. The finger painter had publications. The babysitter would control millions. The afterthought daughter was now the gatekeeper to their funding dreams. Margaret turned to me, extending the microphone. Miss Brooks, would you like to say a few words? She handed me the microphone, and 300 faces waited. My father stood frozen beside me, his Lifetime Achievement Award suddenly seeming smaller in his hands. This was my moment. I could have destroyed him completely, could have listed every dismissive comment, every public humiliation, every time he'd chosen Michael over me. Instead, I chose something more powerful, professional grace. Thank you, Margaret, I began, my voice steady and clear. I'm honored by this opportunity to bridge 2 fields I'm passionate about. I looked out at the audience, Dad's colleagues, his peers, the people who had chuckled at his jokes about my little job just minutes before. The Harper Foundation understands something crucial: health begins in the classroom. The vocabulary a 4-year-old learns determines how they'll describe symptoms at 14. The fine motor skills developed through art projects become the steady hands of future surgeons. I glanced at Michael, including him in my message. Every doctor in this room benefited from early childhood education. Someone taught you to hold a pencil before you held a scalpel. Someone taught you to recognize patterns before you learned to diagnose diseases. The room was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. These were people accustomed to being the smartest in the room, and I was teaching them something they'd never considered. In my new role, I'll ensure that medical institutions requesting educational funding actually deliver on their promises. Too often, hospitals treat education as an afterthought, a box to check for grant applications. Several administrators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew exactly what I meant. They'd written those hollow proposals themselves. Margaret stepped beside me, adding her voice to mine. Bethany will also evaluate our healthcare grant proposals, including the $5 million request from Brooks Medical Center for their new cardiac wing. The murmur that went through the crowd was electric. Everyone understood the delicious irony. The daughter he'd just mocked would decide his legacy project's fate. But I'm sure there's no conflict of interest, Margaret continued smoothly. Bethany has already assured us she'll recuse herself from direct evaluation of family-affiliated proposals. Her team will handle those objectively. Dad tried to recover, his voice hollow. I'm so proud of my daughter. The words rang false after 20 minutes of public dismissal. Margaret delivered the final stroke with surgical precision. This is quite a surprise, Dad managed. The appointment was finalized this afternoon, Margaret replied. Though I understand Bethany had a scheduling conflict with your gala preparations today. Good thing she chose the interview. The pointed comment landed like a bomb. Dad's face reddened as people realized he'd tried to prevent me from attending the interview that just changed my life and his. The reception after Margaret's announcement was a masterclass in shifted power dynamics. I stood near the bar, suddenly surrounded by doctors who'd ignored me for years, now eager to discuss partnerships and collaborations. Dr. Martinez from Pediatrics, Bethany, we should discuss our early intervention program. Dr. Lou from Neurology, your thesis sounds fascinating. Could I read it? Dr. Kim from Psychiatry, I'd love to explore childhood anxiety prevention programs. The same people who chuckled at Dad's jokes now saw me as someone whose approval they needed. They spoke to me as a colleague, an equal, someone who controlled their professional futures. Meanwhile, Dad stood beside his Lifetime Achievement Award, watching his colleagues court the daughter he'd publicly dismissed 20 minutes earlier. The shift was so complete, so absolute, that several people approached him with barely concealed pity. "Your daughter seems remarkable, Robert. You must be proud of her accomplishments." I had no idea she was so accomplished in her field. Each comment was a small knife twist, a reminder that he'd failed to recognize what everyone else now saw clearly. Michael approached me, sincere in his congratulations. "Beth, this is incredible. Why didn't you tell us? Would anyone have listened?" He had no answer for that, because we both knew the truth. Mom hugged me, tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were special. You never said it." "I should have. I'm sorry." Dad finally approached, his voice strained. "We should talk. We should. During business hours. About your proposal." I kept my tone professional, setting boundaries he'd never respected before. "It needs work, Dad. The educational component is inadequate." "You've read it?" "Of course. It's my job now." The reality hit him like a physical blow. His daughter, the one he'd called a babysitter an hour ago, had already professionally evaluated his life's work and found it lacking. "My office can provide guidance on strengthening the educational components," I offered. "Standard consultation services are available to all applicants." I was offering him what I'd never received, professional respect. The boundaries were crystal clear now. This was business. 3 weeks later, my assistant knocked on my Harper Foundation office door. "Ms. Brooks, Dr. Robert Brooks is online too. He says it's about the proposal revision." This was his 4th call that week. I'd established strict professional boundaries. All communication went through official channels. "Transfer him through." "Bethany." Dad's voice was different now, careful, respectful, tinged with something he'd never shown me before, need. "Dr. Brooks. What can I do for you?" I wanted to discuss our educational framework revision. All proposals go through the review committee. Submit your revision through proper channels. Could we discuss it over dinner? Your mother would love to see you. I don't discuss work outside the office. You can schedule a consultation through my assistant. This is ridiculous. I'm your father. Which is exactly why everything must go through proper channels. No special treatment, remember? The silence stretched. Then, the team doesn't understand what you're asking for. They don't understand basic educational methodology. That's concerning for a teaching hospital. More silence. Then, almost quietly, "Could you recommend an educational consultant?" My assistant has a list of approved consultants. Standard rates apply. After I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, processing the conversation. The man who dismissed teaching as not real academics was now desperately seeking educational expertise. The father who'd never asked about my work was calling 4 times a week, begging for guidance. Michael texted that evening, "Dad's driving everyone crazy about the proposal. He's hired 2 education PhDs and a curriculum specialist. He keeps asking Mom to invite you to dinner." I typed back, "I'll come to dinner when he can introduce me without apologizing for my career." "That's unfair," Michael replied. "Is it?" He discovered respect for education the moment it affected his funding. That's not growth, it's pragmatism. 1 month later, Brooks Medical Center submitted their revised proposal. I kept my word. I recused myself completely from the evaluation process. But my team applied the standards I'd set rigorously and fairly. The proposal was excellent. Detailed curriculum, certified educators, measurable outcomes, appropriate funding allocation. Everything I'd required was there, professionally executed and thoroughly researched. The review committee approved it for $3 million instead of $5. Dad called immediately after receiving the notification. $3 million. The committee's decision was final. As I promised, I wasn't involved in the evaluation. But you could appeal, you could. I recused myself, as promised. This is about maintaining professional integrity. This feels like punishment. This is about standards, Dad. Your proposal was approved, just not at the full amount requested. Many institutions received nothing at all. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, the educational program you required, it's actually innovative. Pediatrics is excited about implementing it. Good. That's the entire point. I've been talking to other departments about integrating education into all their proposals. Also good. Another pause. You've changed how our entire hospital thinks about these grants. About education in general. That's my job. The longest pause yet. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, I'm proud of you. The words I'd waited 34 years to hear, delivered only because I'd forced his hand. They should have meant everything. Instead, they felt hollow, respect earned through necessity rather than understanding. Thank you, I said professionally. Is there anything else work-related we need to discuss? Your mother wants you at Thanksgiving. I'll check my calendar. The power had shifted completely. He needed my approval, sought my expertise, called me with questions about educational initiatives. But it wasn't the relationship I'd wanted as a child. It was the one he'd created through years of dismissal, professional distance, achievement-based respect, emotional boundaries. He'd taught me well. 6 months after the gala, I stood in Brooks Medical Center's new education wing, the one shaped by standards I'd created. Dad gave a speech about innovative partnerships between healthcare and education. He mentioned my name 3 times, correctly identifying my title and credentials each time. Progress, of a sort. But the real change was subtler and more profound. Dad now championed early childhood development at medical conferences. He quoted my research in his presentations. He introduced me as my daughter, the director of education at Harper Foundation, without a trace of condescension or apology. We both knew why, though. Professional necessity had taught him what parental love should have provided naturally. At family dinners now, he asked about my work, real questions, not performative ones. He'd read articles I recommended. He understood, finally, that teaching required expertise, that education was a science as complex as surgery. But the warmth I'd craved as a child never came. We had professional respect built on his need rather than genuine understanding. I'd won, but the victory felt different than I'd imagined. I've been thinking, Dad said one evening after discussing his latest educational initiative. I was wrong about your career. About teaching in general. I know. I should have seen your value earlier. Your importance. Yes. Can you forgive me? I looked at this man who'd needed to see my power before seeing my worth. Who'd discovered respect for education only when it affected his legacy. Who'd learned to value teaching because he had no choice. I love you, Dad. I'll always love you. But forgiveness, that has to be earned through understanding, not necessity. I understand now. You understand that education affects your funding. That's not the same as understanding why teaching matters. He nodded slowly, processing this distinction. How do I learn the difference? Volunteer in a preschool classroom. See what we actually do. Not for a photo op or grant requirement, just to understand. Would you let me volunteer in your old classroom? It was the first genuine interest he'd shown in my work without external motivation behind it. I'll ask Miss Martinez. She took over when I left. 3 weeks later, I watched my father, the renowned surgeon, sit in a tiny chair, helping 4-year-olds with pattern blocks. He was terrible at it. His hands, so skilled with scalpels, fumbled with child-safe scissors. He spoke in medical terms the children didn't understand. But he showed up every Tuesday without photographers or press releases, learning patience he'd never had to develop, discovering skills surgery had never taught him. It's harder than surgery, he admitted after his 5th session. Different skills entirely. I see why you loved it. Maybe that was enough. Not the validation I'd wanted as a child, but the understanding I demanded as an adult. He still didn't fully grasp the complexity of teaching, but he respected its power. And sometimes, that's all you can ask from someone who only learned to see value through achievement. Bethany's story isn't just about revenge, it's about the long, difficult process of demanding respect when love should have provided it freely. Sometimes the people closest to us need to see our power before they can see our worth. And while that's a sad commentary on human nature, there's something deeply satisfying about watching someone who dismissed your dreams suddenly need your approval to achieve theirs. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to prove your worth to family who didn't understand your career choices? What boundaries did you have to set to get the respect you deserved? And if you want more stories about people who turned the tables on those who underestimated them, subscribe with notifications on. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, remember, every profession done with excellence deserves respect. You shouldn't have to wait for a power shift to receive it.